At the beginning of the book, Darcy is eligible, but he has no manners. When he first meets Elizabeth Bennet, he snubs her by saying that she's tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me.
I've never found Mr. Darcy very attractive, because he's so cold and so snobbish and so arrogant. My take on him was that this was the way that I had to like him, and so I could write about him, give him a voice. My take on him is that he's uncomfortable amongst the tittle-tattle in which he finds himself, because he's the most eligible man in Britain, and he's being carted around to these house parties like a prize heifer on show for these young women. The calibre of the talk that he listens to, if you can call it talk, would be execrable, because all those young girls are talking about is who's getting married to who and what sort of ribbon their dresses are trimmed with. So he's bored, uncomfortable, restless, frustrated, and not entirely cold and snobbish. That's my theory of him.
Jane Austen made Mr. Darcy one of the richest men in England. And although that certainly helped his eligibility, that's not the most attractive thing about him.
What I love about Darcy is the way that he unfurls in the course of Pride and Prejudice. At the beginning of the book, he can barely manage a civil word to anybody, but by the end of it, he's made positively fluent by his love for the right woman.
And best of all, he has the courage to admit that he made a mistake.
You taught me a lesson, hard indeed at first, but most advantageous. By you I was properly humbled. I came to you without a doubt of my reception. You showed me how insufficient were all my pretensions to please a woman worthy of being pleased.
I read that when I was 11, not knowing anything about the story, and I got to the bit where Darcy proposes to Elizabeth Bennet. And it came on me like an absolute thunderclap. I'd so not expected this awful man to be in love with Elizabeth. And that was part of the wonderful adventure of reading this book for the first time, is that your point of view changes completely, as does Elizabeth's.
Some biographers have argued that Jane Austen based Mr. Darcy on a young Irish lawyer she met in 1796.
Tom Lefroy was a captivating young Irishman that Jane Austen met when she was about 20. He was over from Ireland staying with family friends, and the two young people were thrown together, and they soon became very attached. They were said to dance 6 times together at a dance, causing much consternation. But he still had his way to make in the world. He was training as a lawyer, and Jane, of course, had no money. And as soon as his family found out that it seemed they were getting serious, they got Tom back to Ireland very quickly. And he actually married a couple of years later, but Jane really was left to nurse a broken heart.
She understood romantic love. I think she understood sexual love perfectly well. But she was an observer of romance rather than a participant.
We tend to think of Mr. Darcy as being tall, dark and handsome, but what's interesting is that actually in Pride and Prejudice there is almost no physical description of the hero. It's all left to the reader's imagination.
Readers have to be involved in these narratives, and they have to have a point at which to identify themselves with. They have to find some way of inserting themselves in the narrative, and this is very interesting, the way in which many romantic novels leave certain key details about looks and appearances completely blank. The reader can't learn too much, because the more they learn, the more difficult it will be for them to identify.
But if that's true, why do I have such a clear idea of Mr. Darcy in my head?